Hey, Martina, we are now live. Welcome to the Experience Dialogue. In Experience Dialogue, we pick a hot topic that doesn't have a straightforward answer. We bring in speakers who've been there, seen that, but approached it in very different ways. This is a space for healthy disagreements and discussions, but in a very respectful way. Just by the nature of how we have conceived this, you'll see passionate voice of opinions, and between Martina and I, that would never be an issue. Friends having a dialogue. I'm looking forward to these conversations and thereby interrupting each other and finishing each other's sentences. At the end of the dialogue, we want you, our audience, to leave with valuable insights and approaches that you can take it to the workplace. And we do want to continue the discourse in our social media channels. Introduction to the topic, we are going to be talking about voice of the customer and how it impacts into product growth and developing markets. With that, I would love to introduce Martina, and she is the famous author of Loved and How to Rethink Marketing of Tech Products. She has also helped hundreds of companies navigate through product marketing and go-to-market strategy, and I've had some amazing discussions with her when we started off with Ascendo also. She's a partner, lecturer, advisor, and a board member. I am interested in going through not just Martina's background, but also looking at what she brings in seminal products, her experience bringing out seminal products into the market, including her background from Microsoft, Netscape, but also how SaaS founders can enable customer centricity in terms of growth. Martina, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I actually, enjoyed the book Loved. I know it was primarily written for product management, but as founders, you end up doing a lot of product, and you're listening to customers all the time, and you start off with this whole thing about, is there customer curiosity? And it makes me wonder, that curiosity comes in from multiple angles, right? So in the beginning, is there a market? Afterwards, is there customer curiosity in resolving problems? Is there customer curiosity in asking for more features? Is there customer curiosity in buying new modules? All of that. So could you talk a little bit about customer curiosity?
Yes. Well, I think customer curiosity and helping people understand how do you translate that into product is one of the biggest challenges for any founder as well as for anyone that's in product. And we talk about this a lot in the product world. You can't ask your customer to tell you what to do. You must infer from the sharing of their experience or the observation of the experience how your product might be able to better solve their problem and where you can add value that is disproportionate to the work you're asking them to do in using your product. So I think it's really important for people to not be looking to customers to tell them what they want and need, but to infer how they can better solve problems on behalf of customers, because anyone that's a founder on the product side knows, oh, I know what's possible with technology. Let me solve this for you. I think I can find a better way, and not just look to the customer to tell you what to do.
Yeah, so you're bringing up the standard three-leg stool, which is you hear from the customer what they want, you have the vision that you have for the product, and the third thing is what everybody in the team wants to build, which is because it's so cool, right? So trying to find a balance across all of three. If you could address customer curiosity after the product is at a state where, the feature is out, people love it, people are using it, and then you're kind of debating, is it now, is this company, the go-to-market is product-led growth, customer-led growth, what it is? How would you differentiate the different growth cycles, and how does customer curiosity fit in those?
So I'm a huge advocate of using the customer discovery process as you're building to uncover what are the potential channels for go-to-market. And I think for early stage founders, I think it's very different at different stages. I think in the early stages, you don't know the answer, and you actually have to run a lot of go-to-market experiments to understand the difference between how the market will actually act and behave versus what people will say. I often refer to this as the say-do gap. And you can only try things because, and I've seen this in multiple companies, that companies that try to start with product-led growth, because of course that's a very efficient way to grow, but they have to resort to standard top-down enterprise practices to actually commercialize. So they'll find a user base, but they won't be translating into actual paying customers. And so certainly in the SaaS B2B space, we're seeing much more of this trend toward PLG, which is more of a sales assist as opposed to the primary vehicle for converting people into customers. So you have the product-led user side, and then people look at that data to infer what should our high target sales accounts be based on the usage behavior. And let's use the product as a tool to figure out what our sales strategy might be. And so that's something that we're definitely seeing much more on the rise on the B2B SaaS side, especially also for more mature companies that might have a more established model where they might have an established sales team, or they might have started the other way, being purely PLG. That hybrid model is something that we're seeing a lot of people consider and move toward.
I know in your podcast, you did give some examples of this, and when we were talking to you, had a few examples. I would love to hear one of the examples now.
So my day job is I'm a partner at Costanoa Ventures, and we work with a lot of early stage startups. And one of our startups, as an example, is a startup called Passbase. And so they have something that people can immediately use. And based on that, the sales team then does calls and follow-ups saying, hey, we noticed that you were getting some use out of this. Are there any questions that we can answer? And so it's a consultative sales process, but they can land anyone that they reach out to them typically very quickly within a week or two. And there are another company that I just talked to yesterday, not in our portfolio. They have a product-led growth strategy where they get 200 new logos, and essentially they have that product out there. They have a sales force just follow up via phone or email, and they're usually typically able to close inside of a week. So these are examples of how that shows up in various models in different types of companies, one being a Web3 company, another being a data company. So the models exist in all different categories.
Yeah, definitely. So when you look at the product data in itself, from a customer support, customer success standpoint, we look at it as voice of the customer, right? So that voice of the customer comes in multiple forms in a product-led growth company. And what are the avenues that has worked best from your experience for looking at that customer data? I'm talking install-based data, not just market data alone, right? Both.
Yeah. And I think that I'm a big advocate, and I talked about this earlier, about the fact that we have quantitative data, which the world has given us unbelievable amounts of, but the qualitative data matters just as much too. And one story that I think I might have shared with you was one of Workiva. Their customer success team kept hearing in their conversations. So this was not something that was being captured in product data because the feature didn't exist. These were SEC financial professionals who are sitting in front of spreadsheets that they're getting from all across the company, have to compare and contrast data. So for them, being able to use these products across multiple screens mattered a lot in their day-to-day productivity. This is not something that would have shown up inside of product data, but their customer success team was hearing in their conversations, what would be really helpful is if we could have multi-screen support. And so the customer success team was going to the product team saying, hey, what we keep hearing is that customers really need multi-screen support. And the product team, looking at the product data and doing all of their customer discovery work, felt that there were other priorities that were much more important. Hey, we have all these jobs to be done and these really important integrations that need to be done. And so for them, it felt less urgent and important than other things they had prioritized. But to the customer success team's great credit, they said, no, we have to represent that voice of the customer. This is the number one thing we hear. We really need to do this. So the product team said, okay, we'll put it in the next major release. And of course, in that next major release, the number one most talked about thing was the multi-screen support. So that's a great example of everybody's doing their job, but it's important when product teams make decisions to think about the different ways in which you're receiving that customer insight, and to not only rely on the quantitative or just what the product team itself has discovered, but to listen to the front lines, customer success teams, sales teams, where they have to live with the customer every day and hear what they're saying and factor that into how they make decisions and prioritize.
Yeah, brings up, even within Ascendo, we enable agents and end customers to resolve issue faster. So we call them as individual trees. But then what we did is we ended up saying, why do we have to resolve one issue at a time? Why can't we do it in a bulk? And we aggregated in Ascendo automatically categorizes the issues and provides it. So you can say, hey, I want to resolve these kind of issues and resolve it in bulk. Interestingly, customer agents and triaging people loved it from one angle, but we didn't anticipate that support leaders looking at this going like, oh my gosh, that's my product feedback. So that's exactly, so now I can actually go to the product teams and say, this is why I need this. And here are all the interactions of people who are asking for it. So that's something we didn't anticipate and it came up just with the data and that insight. So thank you for that story. I think qualitative and quantitative both are very important, agreed.
And it's so funny you mentioned the bulk feature. This happened in another company that I work with, where they were looking at one particular persona that needed to do bulk edit of all these things. I need to be able to take all these ad campaigns and run and basically do one huge amount of one thing with a huge amount of campaigns. So hundreds of things, and bulk edit for them, for that particular persona, was really important. And so it was a critically important problem to solve, and they decided to prioritize it. And what they didn't know, and I think this is the thing that we all as product teams need to be open to, is sometimes by solving a problem that's critically important for one audience, you actually open up a vector where all these other audiences can find value. And that's what they found. They thought they were solving a problem for this one persona, but it actually, by having that feature available, suddenly made it more useful on a daily basis to all these other personas inside the company. So it's the same exact scenario that you were describing. We'll sometimes solve a problem that will accidentally be much more valuable to many other people that we can't anticipate, either because we can't, and there's just a certain amount of serendipity, or that's just kind of the nature of opportunity that gets opened up. So I think we always have to have big listening ears on and constantly be paying joint attention to the signals that are overt, as well as things that might be less obvious.
Yeah, it's a good time to introduce a question from Ben, who's asking, you're bringing up the exact point where a lot of CFOs and CEOs they are really focused on the short term, and they don't really get the discovery from the customer focused mindset, or not paying attention to it, or not getting tuned to it, right? So how to work with such people?
I think the really important thing is to connect your processes and your data to the business objectives, because everyone in the C-suite is being held accountable to their business results. How are you growing the business, and what does that look like? And how does anything you're investing in translate into the business all of us are expecting this company to build toward? So I think that's the most important thing to show connection to. As it relates to customer discovery, that's where you need to show, by us creating more value and coming up with better product, here's what we're able to discover or do differently as a result of us having these customer discovery processes. So you want to draw that direct correlation. For example, you might have put 20 different solutions out in discovery and narrowed it down to 2 that are far more useful. You want to talk about all the things you threw away and not just the 2 you pursued, because people won't understand, oh, wow, we considered a whole lot of other stuff, and these 2 were the best by far for these reasons in service of this business objective. That makes a whole lot of sense. So not everybody in the C-suite understands all of the things that product teams are doing. And so drawing that connection and helping them understand how that work translates into the business is what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. You're bringing up a point where that listening has to be or that request back from the customer facing teams back to the board has to be substantiated that with data and insights. So it is these are the types of customers. And the other thing that I heard you say, and I would love to elaborate, you to elaborate on it, which is a lot of times that ends up being either the squeaky customers, loud ones are the most revenue generating ones that are being listened to. But what you are saying makes a lot of sense when it is for the entire larger install base, looking at the larger install base, everything from trials to the highest revenue, and then looking at that insights as a whole. Is that correct, Martina?
Yeah. And I think you want to look at that from the business perspective, which is not just where are we today, but where do we need to go? Where do we need to grow? What is strategically important for us to capture? And that helps you make decisions. So I was working with a company just last week where we looked at the company through the lens of the competition and the
Mm.
competitive market situation, and what you prioritize when you look at the company through that lens versus if you just look at it bottoms up from here are our biggest customers, here's what they're asking for, you'll do different things. And because those are different battlefronts. And some of them are defensive, like the existing install base and the existing customers, that's defensive. Looking at it from the market vantage point is offensive. Where do we need to go? What do we need to make sure we're growing toward? And that will be less obvious stuff. But when you are considering everything, you need to look at it through that lens. Let's make sure we're investing in both and not one at the expense of the other. I think I might have told you an example when I was at Netscape where we were putting product out fast and furious, and quality wasn't what it should be for enterprises. And so the number one complaint across the board everywhere was like, you guys need to work on quality. Like stop making features, just fix everything because too much is is janky. And so we listened to everything that they were saying, and this major release basically became fix everything that's broken for customers. And we were going to fix everything. And so it took a lot longer than everyone's expected because things needed to be rewritten, replatformed, blah, 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 all that stuff. Took probably 6 months longer than it needed to. And there was no innovation. And in that period of time, our number one competitor was innovating. So we solved all of our customers' problems, but we didn't innovate. And that absolutely bit us in the market. And it was the beginning of us not being seen as innovative. So that was a huge lesson learned where you can't just tend to the squeaky wheels, the problems that you have today. You also simultaneously have to be looking toward where do we need to drive the market and what's important. So make decisions using both of those as a lens.
Yeah, what you're bringing up is not doing something and losing the growth. I have an example for doing something that's wrong and losing growth. So we were actually at Sun, we were building a product very similar to AWS. And that particular product, we wanted to get it out to the market as soon as possible. We were told, no, we have to get this many million users, we have to get the performance and the scalability to that because that's some culture, right? So we think big but we haven't gotten the product to the market. There hasn't been a single user, but we were working, and we ended up having to spend 6 months, before which I had to put go back and say, hey, we lost 6 months now, we better go to the market. We will face this problem when it comes, right? When we get that million users will come, but we don't have tens of users yet. So it's one of those things where not doing or doing has to be in tune to the market, which is what you're saying. I think this is a great thing in your book, Love. There is 4 different ways in which you're connecting the insights. So what you talked about connecting market and the customer insight seems like very close to the ambassador. You're talking about the ambassador, the strategist, the storyteller, and the evangelist. I'm trying to figure out if I should go one by one with you or if we should compare and contrast across all of it. What would be the best?
Well, maybe we give an overview, but to your point,
Okay.
I talk about the 4 fundamentals of product marketing. And I think at a meta level, it's important to understand that product marketing, whether it's your title or not, is simply connecting. How does your product get to market through a series of strategic marketing activities that move towards your business goals? So it's not just a title or a person doing the job. It's a function that must be done by a company. So doesn't matter really where it lives or who owns it, the work must be done. And so I try to reduce them to just the 4 fundamentals so people understood this is the work that must be done. And fundamental 1, to your point, was the ambassador, which is connecting customer and market insights. And that's everything that you and I were just talking about. And that can come from anywhere. If you hold the title of product marketer, it is your job to make sure that all of that frontline market signal gets reflected to the product team, as well as that market insight of, okay, what's our competition doing? And what does that mean we need to do or respond to? Some of it might be purely marketing response. Some of it might be product response, but that's what someone who sits in the role would adjudicate. But all that work is going to be done as a collective effort. Number 2 is the strategist, which is directing the product's go-to-market. And that's looking at it through that more strategic lens that we were discussing, which is, okay, how much of our effort needs to be around tending to our existing market or growing into new ones? And what does that mean? What channels should we be more PLG, product-led growth focused versus top down? Or is this a place where our existing channels work just fine? Or do we need new partnerships? So that's thinking about that from that more strategic vantage point. And then all the different helping to guide all the people on the marketing team. Number 3 is the storyteller, and that's shaping the product's perception in the market. So it's not just storytelling, and that's all the messaging and positioning work. And then number 4 is the evangelist. And the key here is that you're enabling others to evangelize about your product. It's not just that you are the one that's doing the talking about your product. And I think that's a big leap and distinction between what I'd say more modern approaches are versus when you and I were first coming up in the market, which is like, hey, you have a product, you get to talk about it. Now there are 5.5 million apps. There are tens of thousands of solutions in across 3 or 4 categories. So we're all bombarded. You don't just get to talk about yourself. Everybody is TMI. Everybody is confused. No one's saying anything.
And it's all cross-pollinating.
It's so confusing. So people want to listen to people they trust, which is not us. It's a colleague. It's something on social media. It's something in a Reddit forum. And so how do you enable others to be your evangelist?
Let's split this with the first 2, which is the ambassador and the strategist, separately, because that is looking signals from inside the company back into the product. Then the other 2, which is to some extent the storyteller and the evangelist, which is what goes from inside to the external people or getting the external people involved. So on the first 2, which is what we are talking about, we have been talking about the ambassador and the strategist. There is a question from social media. In your experience, when you start creating feedback mechanisms to capture and communicate the knowledge of the customer-facing teams back to the product teams, does that have to be a positive motivational effect on everyone? So in a way, you answered this by saying the product marketing has to be tuned to all of this. But here, maybe it's a situation where it sometimes frustrates the engineering folks or has other side effects. Then what should we do?
Well, I always look at customer market insight as a positive thing, not a negative. It should never be like, oh my gosh, this is distracting from the work that we need to do. This is the work that needs to be done. If your product is not in service of the customers and market that you are in, then who are you doing this for? It's never about technology for technology's sake. Sometimes things are broken and need to be fixed, but products exist to solve problems for customers and to be in particular markets that are trying to do things. So it's kind of the game that we're all in. So we have to play. So I would say any customer market insight should be a positive for teams that are trying to make decisions, not a distraction.
If someone is providing, a customer facing team is providing feedback back into their engineering teams and they are not listening, please go ahead and share this particular live to the engineering team and say, hey, Martina says that you have to listen. So, and I am giving you install-based feedback. So that should help for this question. Listening to the customer, getting the market insights is great. This is also another question that has come up. When a customer talks about problems in the product, they are usually correct. But when they talk about solutions, they are usually incorrect. How much truth is there to this saying?
100%. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. The vast majority of cases are true. You will always find that exceptional customer that just has this pitch perfect insight. And then you're like, wow, you're amazing. And always try and keep working with that person wherever they are because they have amazing product insight. That person is rare most of the time, just because they don't have as much visibility into the full realm of possibilities on the solution side. They're going to look at it very narrowly. They're going to look at it through the lens of their experience base. And so 100% listen for the problems, infer how might I solve this in a way that will achieve what they want. But there is some signal in the solutions that they are telling you. Most of the time that signal, my experience of that signal is, don't oversolve or overthink this. I'm telling you a very simple way that I know how to solve the problem. And sometimes it might seem overly simplistic to the team. Oh no, we can do this other way. But there might be some signal there saying, don't make this hard. Don't add a whole new area. Don't make this a big thing. Can you solve this in a very simple way? So there is some signal, not necessarily the solution, but the intent behind how they want to feel in accomplishing the task. I know that seems very subtle, but it can be profound in terms of how complex we solve things and how we complexify in our solutions, I should say.
Yeah, it's a lot of times that I also say to this to our teams, right? So in this iterative model that we are in with SaaS, we can actually have the luxury of solving it simple and seeing how the intent plays to be able to go ahead and improve on it. So there is no reason to come up with something very complex upfront, because gone are the days where we're not shipping CDs anymore. So
so true. And I'm so glad that you said that. Like we live in this fabulous era where we get to iterate quickly. We don't have to ship it and wait another year before we can put out another release. We can put something out there. This is again, the MVP. How do we test our thesis on whether or not this is solving the problem, whether or not it's having value to the customer, and whether or not it's usable. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure that we are doing all of that work as we build.
Yeah, me and my co-founder always talk about the know what, the know how, the know why, right? So the know what, the know why, the know how. So the how we resolve the problem comes last. It's if we focus right on the right intent and understand the intent very, very, very well, the solution can be very simple to solve that particular problem.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. So in terms of how does a ambassador and a strategist, how are they different in a product-led growth company versus a customer-led? Actually, let's take a step back. Tell us what, in your words, how you would differentiate a product-led and a customer-led growth company.
I would say a product-led company is one where they are looking very much at product signal to figure out where to grow and how to do things. And the product is where they manifest how they want to move the market. Whereas a customer-led might be, we're listening more to that, not watching their behaviors in product. We're listening more to the customer's voice overtly, not necessarily just through their product actions. And based on that, we're making adaptations that might not just be in the product. So a lot of customer-led places might adjust sales process, customer success process, brand. There are many other ways to be in service of customers and build a customer relationship. Product-led companies tend to put all of that in the product experience. Whereas I'll say customer-led ones are, well, there are all these other ways that we can serve and connect and provide value to the customer. And it's not necessarily just through the product. But product-led companies, they're like, well, if it doesn't live in the product and that value can't be experienced in the product, then we're not doing our jobs well enough.
Have you seen a combination of the two, Martina? You've seen a lot of startups, and I am yet to see, models are also evolving as we talk, right? So because things are becoming a lot more overlapping, but have you seen a combination of the two that has worked well for any of the companies?
Well, I would not say that Netflix is classically product led in the way that we're talking about now, but I would say they were, as an organization, they are tremendous in leveraging empowered product teams to basically do both of these things within their realms. So the team that was making the product team that was in charge of the homepage, which is just one aspect of the product, which is how do we convert people that come here into trial users and then make sure that we retain them after trial. They had to make decisions on when they signaled, we're about to charge your credit card. Mm-hmm. And one decision led to a huge amount of customer support calls. They wouldn't notify them proactively. And it's like, okay, they're $10 million worth of calls. I'm making that number up, but a huge number of calls would come in where people's like, oh, I forgot to not have my credit card be charged. Can you just take it off? And so they solved that problem by proactively notifying people in the product as part of the product experience. Let's proactively notify them that we're about to charge their credit card, so people remembered. And that wound up costing them $50 million in revenue. So it was a much more expensive decision, but it was the right brand choice to do right by the customer and be honest about what was happening. And so they made a choice that wasn't the best, quote unquote, revenue choice and business choice, but it was the right customer choice. And they discovered all this through product forward process. They made the right brand decision. And of course, this is, many, many years ago, they said, it's more important for us to be a trusted brand because of what we're building long-term. And of course, Netflix is what it is today. And I think as an organization, they're spectacular at combining product signal with customer signal.
Yeah, and interesting you say that. And I'm also seeing this within my experience. There is with companies of all sizes. I've recently talked to a company that's only 15 people, but they have 115,000 users, customers using their product. And what I'm noticing is, and some very, very large companies that have actually, cloud companies and collaboration companies that I've also talked to, where they have been traditionally product-led growth, but at some point evolve into customer-led growth for cross-sell, upsell, training, product feedback, the entire voice of the customer input. So even product-led growth companies, irrespective of the size, as they get the number of users and they get the number of customers, and I see them moving towards this customer-led growth for growing within the same accounts or even identifying markets. And I think that's pretty much what you're alluding to with your Netflix example, correct?
Yeah. And then also just exactly what you were saying, which is there's so many other ways in the modern arena. Products can feel very equivalent to customers. And so if you want to be a retained customer, people want to have a sense of affinity and relationship with the brands that they choose to do business with. That stuff is impacted by the product, but there are all these other places, exactly what you were talking about, the sales process, customer support, the brand, what's on social, how the company behaves on social. Do you get hit up constantly with like, hey, come attend this? Like when you're already a customer, do you keep hitting up for more stuff, more marketing? Or do you just feel this connectedness and this love of the product and from the company? Those things are not in product. Those are marketing decisions, sales decisions, many other organizations, the legal team and how big the privacy policy is and how frequently that gets updated and put in the experience. Those are all other departments. And that is really thinking about what's the customer's holistic experience of us as a company. It might be primarily through the product, but all these other things have an impact too.
Yeah, that's where, and the more a company is tuned to that, the better they build the trust, which is the underlying thing with the customers and with potential prospects. So, because then the foundational value is really, that flywheel thing where you have the customer in the middle and literally every other department is operating for the customer. And everybody is just tuned into these customer insights. And it's interesting you did bring in legal, but it is true. It is true. And it's not just marketing, it's not just customer support, not success alone, but it is, and not engineering alone. It's every department. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that what often happens is in any company of any size, everyone's doing their silo. And we're building the product, and I'm mitigating risk with these privacy policies or with these compliance internal rules. All that matters. But from the customer's perspective, like, I don't care what's going on inside your company. And I want to be treated as a human being, and that my business to you has value, even if it's small, but everyone wants to feel that way.
Yeah, I recently had a call with a customer support person. It was a very, it was not a good situation, and I was unhappy as a customer. And I did mention to the support person, I'm not upset with you, but I'm upset with the company that you're not as a whole representing, the entire company, but just saying, this is my department, this is another department, this is another department. How many times are you going to transfer me back and forth and say, this is not your problem? It should be every one of your problem, right? So it frustrates as a customer to be in that position when people you are talking to doesn't represent their entire company and just represents a small portion of it.
Yeah, that's, if you think about all of your favorite companies or brands that you go back to, I would bet most of them you've had these positive customer experiences with, where they didn't frustrate you. They didn't kind of throw like, oh, that's not that's someone else. Like, think about airlines. No one has a favorite airline because everyone's like, well, that's not my problem. That's somebody else's problem. Or let me go talk to the manager. And it's just so frustrating. And that's not what anybody wants.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about an ambassador versus a strategist, what kind of data is an ambassador pulling in to get that quantitative and qualitative metrics? And what kind of data is a strategist pulling in for quantitative and qualitative metrics? You can answer them one by one. You
Yeah.
put two questions in one. Yeah.
So the ambassador, in my book, I talk about this woman named Mala, who now runs all of marketing across the entire Adobe Creative Suite. And when she came to Silicon Valley, she made it her business to know the business better than anyone. And so she went to the product teams and she represented, well, here's what our market share is relative to others. And here's what I'm seeing in the marketplace. She made sure she brought the business data, the market data, the competitive data, and the customer data, and that she brought it to every conversation that the product team was having. And they didn't realize that they were missing this very important aspect of how they were making decisions until she came and she was regularly representing those key important aspects. So that's the kind of data as the ambassador that someone needs to bring. And then the inverse of that, you're the ambassador out to the go-to-market teams of the product information to make sure that the right product information is making it out to the go-to-market teams, marketing teams, sales teams. Or we talking about legal teams? Hey, we're about to add this new thing. Does that change anything in our privacy policies? So that's the ambassador connecting both ends, not just one in and it's both in and out.
In and out.
So that's the ambassador aspect. The strategist, that is, okay, now that we know and understand all these things about the product, the market, and the customer, how does that translate into the best possible go-to-market for the product? And that is primarily crafting a strategy that directs the go-to-market aspect out. So that's not bidirectional. It's bidirectional in the sense that you take input from sales and marketing teams, but it's really providing that guidance so that they are for all the marketing and sales effort that it's maximally effective and strategic and positioning the company.
Yeah, and for that strategist, it's, these days, sales, or I should say, sales kind of is becoming synonymous to customer success. So I just wanted to call that out. So for teams that do that, when Martina talks about sales and marketing in this case, it applies to the customer success teams who are looking into the cross-sell and upsell also. Shifting the gear a little bit, a storyteller is shaping how the world thinks about the product, and an evangelist enables other people to tell the story. I can see that, how can a founder utilize these two very efficiently? Let's go with that first, and then I'll have a follow-on.
So storytelling, so shaping how the world thinks about a product. Positioning is positioning your product in the market. And how you do that, the anchor point to that is how you message and talk about it. But there are many other things that ultimately build to a product's positioning. So I do want to make that distinction that positioning isn't a one-time event where here's the sentence, we are now positioned. It's all of the consistent behaviors that build toward that market position. So that's a really important thing for founders to understand. As it relates to messaging, I think this is also very different than what most people understand. There is messaging that fundamentally positions you, like you land here, this is what we do, and it's clear to the maximum number of audiences. And then there's campaign-based messaging, which is, what am I saying in this particular campaign to capture this audience? And you need to have those things separated so that they are not conflated with one another. And what is very effective for this campaign to data engineers is separate from this campaign to the C-suite that are the decision makers. You have to message different things. And so that's why you have a messaging hierarchy that lets you have appropriate messages for those different audiences. But the primary message, which most people will call a positioning statement, is how do you most simply articulate what you do and its value? And the big thing there I'll say is people think that it's a formula or think that it's coming up with a tagline that's catchy, but really the most important thing is, can you clearly articulate so others can understand the value they should be extracting from your product and why it might be either important or different? You can't apply a formulaic approach to get there. You really have to discover your way to what is meaningful to the market and not just how you want to be talking about it. And that's what most founders don't know. They're like, well, here are the different ways in which I think I want to say it, which is the one that is pinging or working. It's really discovering your way into like, oh, I'm understanding how the market's talking about it, and I'm intersecting between what I want to say and what they are capable of hearing.
Yeah, our audience is a lot of customer-facing teams. And for the customer-facing teams, the messaging comes in from the product marketing, but you also know the messaging because you are so much in tune with the customers, because you're talking to the customers on a day-to-day basis. What is that kind of messaging that you would suggest that as a storyteller or as an evangelist that customer-facing teams can utilize to build better trust and better relationships?
I think it is super crucial for customer-facing teams, customer success, sales, anyone that deals on a daily basis with the customer, to bring in what they are hearing to those that are crafting the mothership positioning or messaging. Like there's no product marketer that should feel they could do their job well without consulting those teams. And it's not just, you're looking very specifically for what words do they use when they're actually talking about it? Because we have this tendency to talk using our jargon and in a way that presumes understanding and knowledge on behalf of our customers. And by listening to what they actually say in real situations, either back to a sales rep or back to a customer success rep, kind of like that Workiva example, where it's like, hey, we're looking for multi-screen support. No one's asking us for this, but this is how we talk about it. And this is what's important to us. You're looking for that type of market signal to create messaging that's resonant, that really lands with and is clear to those customers. And so everyone that works in that function, take the very specific words that you hear again and again back to the marketing teams, because that's what they need to know. And that will help lift them from the habit of trying to be cute, or I'll say jargony, or coming up with a value statement that anybody could say, and find things that are explicitly meaningful to you, your company, and your product, and people's experience with you.
Yeah, it's funny. We at Ascendo, our messaging was, we are a support experience platform, but then our customers relate back to us saying, "Oh my gosh, you are an expert in every one of my agents' back pockets." Ooh, that's the level of messaging that when they say it, it feeds back into the messaging itself, and it's awesome. It's like physicians carrying this little book in their pockets, right? So,
That is a beautiful example of how you guys articulate, like, we're a customer experience platform. By the way, platform, my least favorite word. And like everyone was like, oh, if we're not a platform, we're not actually talking about what we do. Like, platform means nothing to anyone anymore,
anyone,
people. It's meaningless. And if you're
yes,
relying on it to communicate anything, you do not have strong messaging. What you said your customers said to you, like, that was brilliant, because that was
yes.
clear. It was clear. It clearly articulated to them the value that you were providing and why it might be different, as opposed to declaring a category or declaring the platform you are, which is what everyone's habits around.
Yeah, and I would love to see your next book to be for everybody else around the messaging, or the customer facing teams around the messaging, not just the product marketeers. Martina, Loud is fantastic. I think the other look is also going to be fascinating, and would be very interesting. So I
Well,
really enjoyed it.
thank you. And I did write it with the intention of anyone that isn't a product marketer would get as much value. So the feedback that I've been getting that's been most validating is I had someone who was a head of school read Loved and
Yeah,
say, like, oh, this is making me rethink some of the things that we say about our school. I had a
yeah.
controller in the finance department read it, and she said, I had no idea what our marketing team was doing. And now I actually have strong points of view on how these are just numbers in a spreadsheet. Now I have a point of view on whether or not we're doing the right stuff. And I think we're saying the wrong things. So it's just been delightful to hear people outside of the domains of marketing realizing, oh, I can participate in this. And sometimes because you are not in it, you might see things a little bit more clearly. So it gives people those foundational tools so that anyone, even outside of the product marketing practice, can learn the tools of the trade.
I'm sure when you wrote it, you were thinking about the technology sector, and there you are listening to the market and the customer insights, even for the book. And you're like, oh my gosh, people who run a school are looking at it. Even though you wrote it, it comes in, that feedback comes in from very many places. It's amazing. There is a fantastic example of customer facing teams listening to that market insight. So thank you. Um, the One of the things we talk about is look at the sentiment of every interaction and say, oh, okay, this person is very happy with the product. Is there a way we can engage them into a marketing activity, maybe coming up with a case study or anything else, right, or speaking or whatever it is. So there is that part of engaging with the others or being an evangelist that you talk about in the book. So how do customer-facing teams get that insights of who can be a good evangelist, and what are the best ways that customer-facing teams can approach and can make that as a viable, what is the right word?
How do
Uh,
you translate that into something
Translate.
that
Yeah,
creates market momentum, where it's actually something that you can use?
that
Yeah.
creates market momentum. Yes.
So one of my favorite examples of this was a company who would listen for customers that were like that. They're like, ooh, this customer is really engaged. they would have someone systematically, everyone on the marketing team, this was everyone's job, at least 1 to 2 interviews a week, that they would talk to customers that were like that and do interviews and say, hey, I'd love to do a 15-minute interview. I've heard that you're a really engaged or innovative customer, and we love to hear your stories. So again, it's not like I want to do a case study. I want to hear your story. And they're tiny little ways of phrasing this that just make it something people want to do, as opposed to this extraction that feels like it's a burden. And say like, okay, so tell me what life was like before you were using our product. So then you're capturing and understanding more deeply the problem surface, as well as what they were trying to do better. What was the straw that broke the camel's back that made you decide to do something about this? So there you're understanding what is the activation force. And that provides incredible insight to all the go-to-market teams going, oh, this is the thing that finally makes them do it. And then they start a search, or what made them actually take action, because that's what you're always looking to find. And then I've heard that you're doing particularly innovative things with our product. What are you now able to do that you weren't able to do before? This helps you articulate and find those areas of difference. And then you spin these up as stories, not as case studies, that everyone that is customer facing can use in their conversations. So you have bullet points of, oh, so the next customer success conversation I'm having where someone says, oh yeah, I've experienced this problem. I know because I've read a story where someone articulated that problem, say, oh, you know what? We have another customer that experienced that same problem, and here's how they're using the product. I didn't send you a case study, which sounds very structured and inauthentic. I'm sharing a story of someone that feels like they're like you. And so that's what, and then people, if it's shared as a story, it's much easier for others to share. I can now share that story with one of my colleagues saying, oh, you know what? I just had a conversation this morning, and someone who experienced this problem, they solved it this way using this product. This very thing happened to me.
Thank you for the insight. There's 2 aspects of it, right? One aspect of it is the storytelling part, where the actual storytelling can be resonated. Second thing is, connecting and customers and do best practices. We tend to do it even across industries, and we have found that customers love talking to people even outside of the industry to see how they solve their own problems. And you are giving an example of product-led growth, so that's awesome. Martina, I think this is wonderful. We had a very, very, very good discussion with respect to quantitative, qualitative data, product-led, customer-led growth company. And we talked about the 4 anchors in which anybody who's messaging can utilize. Would you like to add anything else before we fully wrap up?
I'd say all of us, that no matter what seat you sit in at an organization, all of us can help our companies be more customer and market forward. And the more companies that do that, the better it is for every customer and also for the market writ large. So I would just encourage everyone to get a little more customer savvy, a little bit more market savvy, and let's all do a better job of translating that into how we act and behave towards customers so that they can make better decisions more easily and get more value from our products.
Thank you very much. This is going to be very useful for all our customer-facing teams to understand, articulate, and respond to customer requests. Thank you very much for your time, Martina. I enjoyed this conversation a ton.
It's been great. Thank you for having me and for driving the conversation and having these stories hopefully be told to others.
Absolutely. Thanks.